useless.
Not putting my jacket on him.
Says, well, I'm playing Titleist 1, and Jack says, I'm playing Titleist 1, and Jack goes, yeah, I've been playing it for 32 years.
What happens when perfection becomes poison? When the standards that made you great make you impossible to love? This is the story of Sir Nick Faldo, a golfer who conquered the sport through ruthless discipline, only to discover that the walls he built to protect his competitive edge isolated him from everyone else. 6 major championships couldn't buy him affection. Decades of excellence couldn't earn him forgiveness. And at 68 years old, his legacy remains defined as much by the feuds he cultivated as the trophies he collected. Before we tee off, if you're a true golf fan, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and tell us in the comments who your favorite golfer is. Your support helps us keep creating even more incredible golf videos for you. Nobody loved him. That's not hyperbole or exaggeration. It's the uncomfortable truth about one of golf's most successful yet divisive figures. Faldo held grudges like other players held club championships, nursing perceived slights for decades with the same focus he once brought to major tournaments. His memory for grievances was as sharp as his iron play, his capacity for forgiveness as limited as his tolerance for imperfection. His feuds with 4 specific golfers reveal something profound about the cost of greatness and what happens when someone believes their way is the only way worth following. The most recent explosion came in 2023, when Faldo reignited his long-simmering conflict with Sergio Garcia in spectacular fashion. The roots of their animosity stretched back 15 years to 2008, when Faldo captained the European Ryder Cup team to a disappointing loss. In the aftermath, Faldo didn't engage in diplomatic platitudes or careful language. He called Garcia useless and blamed his attitude for undermining the team's chances. Garcia, displaying maturity that Faldo seemingly lacked, refused to escalate publicly, saying only that he could say much about Faldo, but wouldn't lower himself to that level. 15 years of Cold War followed, with both men maintaining their distance and nursing their resentments. Then Garcia made what proved to be a critical mistake. He publicly criticized Rory McIlroy's maturity in handling their friendship difficulties. Faldo saw his opening and pounced with the ferocity of someone who'd been waiting years for justification. He declared Garcia the most immature player he'd ever witnessed in his entire career, a devastating indictment coming from someone who'd competed against golf's elite for decades. The irony was lost on no one with functioning critical thinking skills. A man criticizing someone else's maturity while nursing a decade-and-a-half-old grudge represented either spectacular self-deception or complete lack of self-awareness. But for Faldo, this wasn't about consistency or fairness. It was about standards and discipline. Garcia represented everything Faldo despised about modern professional golf: immense talent undermined by emotional volatility, potential squandered by temperament, greatness prevented by an inability to maintain the cold focus that Faldo believed separated champions from pretenders. Garcia's crime wasn't lacking ability. Everyone acknowledged his skill. His sin was allowing feelings to compromise performance, letting passion become liability rather than asset. Even other European Ryder Cup captains noticed Faldo's excessive harshness. Sam Torrance, who had led the team successfully before Faldo, publicly criticized his approach with barely disguised contempt, suggesting that Faldo consistently said foolish things without considering consequences or impact. The criticism revealed something important about Faldo's standing. His standards had made him unpopular even within his own golfing community, among people who should have been natural allies. To understand why Faldo became this way requires examining the foundation upon which his success was constructed. His career wasn't built on natural talent or charismatic personality. It was systematically engineered through absolute control over every variable he could possibly influence. 3 Masters victories, 3 Open championships, 97 weeks as world number 1, 43 professional tournament wins across multiple continents. This catalog of achievement came from someone who eliminated mistakes through sheer force of will and obsessive preparation. Faldo openly admitted, without apparent shame or regret, that he didn't want friends on tour. He wanted victories. Relationships were weaknesses that could compromise competitive advantage, distractions that could undermine focus at crucial moments. So he built what admirers called the Faldo method. Systematic elimination of errors through perfect preparation, meticulous practice, and emotionless execution under pressure. What critics called isolation and coldness, Faldo called strategic thinking. The wall between himself and other players wasn't accidental circumstance. It was calculated architecture designed to preserve his competitive edge against everyone trying to defeat him. This philosophy, effective as it was individually, inevitably led to conflict with players who approached golf differently. Paul Azinger became the most prominent victim of Faldo's ruthless excellence, his career forever intertwined with Faldo's through a series of painful encounters that left lasting psychological scars. Their defining moment came at the 1987 Open Championship at Muirfield, where Faldo produced one of golf's most perfect final rounds under championship pressure. 18 consecutive pars for a methodical score of 71. There was no drama, no heroics, no spectacular shots, just relentless, grinding perfection that wore down opponents through sheer consistency. Meanwhile, Azinger, holding the tournament lead, collapsed with bogeys on the final 2 holes, watching his championship hopes disintegrate in real time. Faldo's cold precision had systematically defeated Azinger's emotional vulnerability. The loss haunted Azinger for years afterward, following him through subsequent victories that somehow felt diminished. He later admitted publicly that his own achievements felt smaller in Faldo's shadow, that everything he accomplished seemed less significant when compared to Faldo's icy dominance and major championship pedigree. But their story didn't end at Muirfield. In 2008, they faced each other again, this time as Ryder Cup captains leading their respective teams into battle. Faldo approached leadership exactly the way he'd approached his playing career, demanding perfection, maintaining emotional distance, refusing to compromise standards or make allowances for human weakness. His team responded poorly to this rigid structure. Players felt uncomfortable in the team environment, struggling under methods that left no room for human connection, emotional support, or acknowledgement that people respond differently to pressure. Azinger took a fundamentally different approach that challenged everything Faldo believed about competition. He created what became known as the pod system, dividing his team into smaller groups based on personality compatibility and playing style rather than pure statistical performance. His team bonded, responded positively to his leadership style, and ultimately won convincingly. The player who'd spent his entire career feeling inferior to Faldo, living in his shadow and questioning his own accomplishments, had proven something crucial, that Faldo's way wasn't the only way to succeed, and perhaps in team settings wasn't even the best way to achieve victory. For Faldo, the loss represented more than a Ryder Cup defeat. It was a fundamental challenge to his entire worldview about what produced success. His methods had produced individual championships through eliminating variables and maintaining control, but they failed spectacularly in leadership roles requiring different skills. He'd learned, painfully and publicly, that managing people requires understanding them as complex humans with emotional needs rather than treating them as machines designed solely for victory. The experience should have taught Faldo humility. Instead, it seemed to harden his conviction that others were falling short of standards he'd maintained throughout his career. The feud with Greg Norman carries even more dramatic weight, defined by one catastrophic moment that neither man could escape, regardless of subsequent achievements. Throughout the late 80s and early 90s, Faldo and Norman represented golf's absolute elite, 2 dominant players constantly battling for supremacy at the sport's highest level. Then came the 1996 Masters at Augusta National, where golf history was rewritten in the most painful way imaginable. Norman entered the final round with a commanding 6-shot lead over the field. What should have been his coronation as Masters champion became instead the most spectacular collapse in major championship history. He shot 78, hitting 4 bogeys and 5 double bogeys as his game systematically disintegrated under pressure. Meanwhile, Faldo maintained perfect composure throughout the chaos, shooting 67, the day's best score, to win by 5 strokes in a stunning reversal. After the round concluded, Faldo embraced Norman in what appeared to be genuine sympathy for what he'd just witnessed. The gesture seemed sincere, a rare moment of human connection from someone who typically avoided such displays. But the embrace, however well-intentioned, also cemented Norman's legacy in the cruelest possible way. People would remember Norman not primarily for his numerous victories and dominant stretches, but for this spectacular loss, this moment when pressure revealed vulnerability at precisely the wrong time. For years afterward, the two men maintained distance without open hostility. Norman continued his career, Faldo added to his major championship collection, and their rivalry existed primarily in retrospective comparisons. Then Norman became the figurehead for LIV Golf, and Faldo's dormant anger reignited with volcanic intensity. He accused Norman of wrecking everything he'd built through years of success, of leading a tour that Faldo saw as fundamentally fraudulent and damaging to golf's traditions. LIV represented everything Faldo despised about modern golf: entitlement without earning credentials, guaranteed money without merit-based qualification, players demanding access to major championships despite abandoning the traditional tour structure that gave those championships meaning. For Faldo, this wasn't merely about competing organizations or business decisions. It was about integrity and tradition, about respecting the systems that had made golf meaningful for generations. Majors meant something precisely because they were difficult to access, because qualification required sustained excellence rather than signing a lucrative contract. LIV was cheapening golf's values by offering guaranteed money and status without requiring the grinding success that separated champions from pretenders. Norman's involvement confirmed what Faldo had apparently always suspected, that Norman lacked the discipline and integrity that defined true champions. That his 1996 Masters collapse wasn't just a bad day, but evidence of deeper character flaws that prevented him from maintaining Faldo's standards under ultimate pressure. The feud with Seve Ballesteros differed fundamentally from the others in ways that reveal something important about Faldo's capacity for respect. Where Garcia and Norman represented failures of discipline and integrity in Faldo's judgment, Seve represented the opposite end of golf's philosophical spectrum: pure talent and instinct rather than methodical planning, creativity rather than control, passion rather than precision. Their clashes, occurring primarily at Ryder Cups, where national pride intensified emotions, came from fundamentally different philosophies about how golf should be played and what produced success. Faldo hated what he perceived as Seve's gamesmanship, particularly an incident at the 1989 Ryder Cup when Seve questioned Faldo's ball choice during active play. Psychological warfare that Faldo saw as fundamentally unprofessional and disrespectful to competition's integrity. Yet despite their rivalry and philosophical differences, when they met at the 1995 Ryder Cup, they embraced with what appeared to be genuine warmth. Faldo respected Seve in ways he couldn't respect Garcia or Norman because Seve's flamboyant style actually worked consistently at the highest level. He won major championships, led Europe to multiple Ryder Cup victories through genius that transcended methodology. This grudging respect prevented their feud from becoming as bitter or personally vindictive as the others that defined Faldo's later years. What connects all these feuds into a coherent pattern is Faldo's consistent criticism focused on the same fundamental issues. He attacks players for lacking discipline, controlling emotions poorly, or disrespecting golf's integrity and traditions. Every conflict follows essentially the same template. Someone does something Faldo considers unprofessional, immature, or disrespectful to the game's values. and he responds with harsh public judgment based on his own impossibly high standards that few humans could consistently maintain. He genuinely believes, without apparent irony or self-doubt, that he's protecting golf from people who would cheapen its values through shortcuts or emotional indulgence. He sees himself as the guardian of what makes professional golf meaningful and worthwhile. In his mind, calling out players who fall short isn't cruelty or unnecessary harshness. It's necessary maintenance of standards that made the sport great and kept it from descending into mediocrity. Faldo has become golf's self-appointed judge and jury, using his prominent commentary platform to pronounce who meets his exacting criteria for excellence and who falls embarrassingly short. His judgments are based exclusively on what he learned as a player through decades of competition. That the best golfers possess perfect control over emotions, perfect discipline in preparation, and perfect respect for tradition and established hierarchies. Players showing excessive emotion, making preventable mistakes, or challenging the establishment are, in his rigid view, fundamentally wrong and deserving of public criticism. This makes him perpetually controversial within golf circles. Some observers see him as excessively harsh and judgmental, someone whose bitterness about his own isolation has curdled into resentment toward anyone who succeeds differently. Others believe passionately that the sport needs voices defending traditional standards against modern compromises and shortcuts. But nobody can deny that Faldo has strong opinions and expresses them without concern for popularity, criticism, or social consequences. He never backs down from conflict, regardless of how many people attack him for negativity, or how much damage his words cause to relationships. Yet beneath all the feuds and harsh judgment lies an uncomfortable question that Faldo himself may have never seriously considered. Was his approach actually worth the cost? He achieved remarkable success through methods that systematically isolated him from human connection and genuine relationships. He won championships that will be remembered for generations but couldn't maintain friendships or inspire loyalty beyond professional obligation. He proved conclusively that his discipline was superior to others' approaches, but couldn't inspire others to follow his example or adopt his methods successfully. His Ryder Cup captaincy failure wasn't just about tactics or team selection. It revealed that his philosophy, however effective for individual achievement, couldn't translate to leadership requiring empathy, flexibility, and understanding that people respond differently to pressure and authority. Faldo's legacy remains profoundly complicated. 6 major championships and countless victories balanced precariously against decades of conflict and an apparent inability to forgive human imperfection or weakness. He shaped modern golf through his achievements and rigorous standards, but also through his feuds and harsh judgments, proving that sometimes the walls we build to protect our competitive edge become prisons that prevent genuine connection with others who share our profession. Nick Faldo wanted desperately to be golf's greatest champion, to be remembered for excellence that transcended his era. Instead, he became its loneliest one, celebrated for achievements, but isolated by the very methods that produced them. Whether that represents ultimate triumph or profound tragedy depends entirely on what you believe matters most in life: the trophies collected and records established, or the relationships sacrificed and human connections abandoned in relentless pursuit of perfection that nobody else could match or maintain.